Welcome to Genetics Decoded. I'm Sharon Palmer, your host. Please note that the information presented here is not to be taken as medical advice, it's just general information only. Are you on a plant-based diet? Are you vegan? If so, you're going to want to listen to this today. When you're following those types of diets, there's a real risk that you can become deficient in key nutrients. Do you even know what they are? Do you know why that would be important to your health? So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at these key nutrients, your vitamin B12, your vitamin D, your choline, and your essential fatty acids, your EPA and DHA. How are you going to make sure that you're not deficient if you are following these types of diets? Today we're going to discuss plant-based diets or people who've chosen to be vegans. A lot of people are going down this pathway now. People do it for a whole range of different reasons. There's a number of us who think that adopting those types of diets is ultimately going to be healthier for us. Some people have ethical issues around eating animals or animal products, and so they choose to stay away from it. It doesn't really matter what your reason is for following either a plant-based or a vegan diet, or for any diet really, is that the main thing is whatever diet choice you have adopted is that you don't want to become deficient in key nutrients. And that is the thing to really consider, is that there will be certain food groups or nutrients in food groups that as you remove them, you then begin to run the risk of becoming deficient. And if you become deficient, then that diet choice is not going to be good for you from a health point of view. So if you're plant-based or you're vegan, there are 4 key nutrients that we're going to cover today that you may really be at risk of being low in. The first one is your vitamin B12. The second is your vitamin D. The third is your choline and its ability to convert into phosphatidylcholine. And then the fourth is your essential fatty acids, specifically your EPA and your DHA. We're going to start today with your vitamin B12. This is probably, of all of the nutrients here, is the one that we will be most at risk of being low in. Vitamin B12 is so critical in the body, you just can't afford for it to be low. And your capacity to produce vitamin B12 within the body itself is pretty negligible. So you really are reliant on it coming in from a dietary point of view or a supplement point of view. The problem is vitamin B12 is going to be found in your animal-based products, particularly your meat, your dairy, your fish, and your eggs. You can see that if you've removed those foods from your diet, then my question to you is, well, how are you addressing your vitamin B12 status? Now, I see a lot of people adopt certain types of diets. I remember I had one woman come into the clinic, and when I first saw her, she was vegan, and then I think it was a couple of months down the track, she came back in and I said, so how are you going with your vegan diet? She goes, oh no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm on the carnivore diet. And I just go, that's like from one extreme to the other. So people are often so looking for solutions. They're desperate for outcomes. They hear about something and they think, I'm going to do that, or I'm going to try this. And so they can be all over the place. What I don't often see is that no matter what diet choice people are choosing, is that they're not examining whether they're going to be fulfilling their nutritional needs. It often doesn't even cross their mind. If you're plant-based or vegan and it hasn't even occurred to you that your B12 may be low, well, listen up, because we're going to have a good talk about it. But maybe you've gone, you know what, I'm all over that. I know that I'm at risk of my B12 being low, and I'm putting all of these plant-based foods in that are high in B12, so my bases are covered. Unfortunately, that may not be true. We know that B12, that comes in our animal products is very different to the B12 that is delivered through plants. And when you're looking at plant sources of B12, they are called pseudo B12 coronoids. And what is very clear is that they do not dock onto your receptor very well at all. You might have some B12 being delivered into the body, but it's in a form that can't attach to the receptor and therefore has no biological activity. And I know that if you're plant-based and you've been eating these foods and I've just told you that, it's probably the last thing you want to hear. But it's important to know because now you can start to make some much better choices. Now, the reason that these plant B12 coronoids are so bio-unavailable is that their ability to dock onto that receptor is decreased by 500-fold. That is really significant. If we look at what a twofold decrease would be, that's about 100%. We're talking about 500-fold. And so this is why you're seeing that researchers are saying no biological activity. The ability to get onto that receptor is pretty much zilch. You could be having all of these foods and you will not be meeting your B12 requirements. The other problem is that these pseudo B12 coronoids are sitting on the transport proteins and they will be blocking other forms of B12 from docking on. So you've got this compound effect is that, even if there were some other sources of B12, maybe you were taking a supplement, then they may not be transported. So you've got a bit of a double whammy. You can't be relying on these plant sources. And for a lot of vegans and vegetarians, they're often going to these chlorella or these spirulina products. They're using algae-based products. They're using mushrooms. They're using seaweed. And they're just not delivering the outcomes that you have, maybe had expected. Researchers are saying we should be really clear, that we should have much, much better labelling in the marketplace so that people are aware that they may not be meeting their requirements. But what we see is that the labelling requirements are very poor. Don't expect your manufacturer to tell you that product might not be delivering your B12 in the way that you thought. If you're plant-based or vegan, you need to be thinking outside of your plant-based products as to how you're going to deliver B12 into the body. And that comes back to primarily I'm going to have to supplement. I was curious. I thought, how widespread is B12 deficiency in vegetarians? And so I looked at some research, and I'm going to directly read this to you. In people who are vegetarians, 60% of pregnant women are deficient in B12. Up to 80% of children who are vegetarians, they're deficient in B12. In adolescents, 41% are deficient, and in older adults, it's up to 90%. That's quite shocking in a way. So this is looking across around vegetarians and how many of them are not meeting their B12 requirements. It's the majority of people. So this is where you can't afford to just go, I'm sure I'm fine. It's more likely that you're not. And particularly if you're pregnant, you want to be making sure that you've got this B12 covered. You might go in and go, okay, my diet's not delivering the outcomes here. I'm going to go in and I'm going to start to supplement. But there's a number of things that you may really want to think about before you go out and you buy that supplement. Most people will go into a pharmacy or into a health food store, and there'll be a whole range of different B vitamins across a whole range of different manufacturers. People will often buy from the manufacturer that they're comfortable with, but the main thing you need to consider around your B12 supplement is what form are you taking? Most people are surprised that there's even different forms. People just think, B12's B12, it won't matter, I'll just buy it, they're all the same. But they're not all the same. A lot of supplements will have what we call cyanocobalamin in them. So cyanocobalamin is a synthetic form of B12. It doesn't occur naturally anywhere else. It is a manufactured form. And the problem with cyanocobalamin is when you ingest it and you metabolize it, it releases cyanide into the body. And that's not good for you. So why would you want to be taking cyanocobalamin? You might raise the question, well, why would a manufacturer be putting it in my product in the first place? And the reason for that is one, it's super cheap. Doesn't cost a lot of money to produce, and it has this incredibly long shelf life. So the product can sit on the shelf, it's not going to go out of date. The only other people who have cyanocobalamin in their body are people who are smokers, and that's because of the cyanide that's being delivered. If you're taking a multivitamin or you're taking a B supplement, I want you to go home and turn it over and have a look to see if it's cyanocobalamin. And if it is, you want to get rid of it. One, because it releases this cyanide. It is also the worst absorbed form of B12. So again, stop thinking that just because you take a supplement that it's in the body. You've got to transport and absorb that, and the cyanocobalamin form is poorly absorbed through the body. It won't just be in your supplements and your multivitamins that you will find cyanocobalamin. Your food manufacturers are now starting to add it to your foods. So when you see a product that's got added vitamins and minerals, have a look to see whether the B12 is the cyanocobalamin form. A lot of these energy drinks and health drinks now that have got these added vitamins and minerals are often using cyanocobalamin. Go in and start to have a look. You want to stay away from that form. What you want to do is have a look at the type of B12 you're taking. There are a whole range of them. There are things called hydroxycobalamin, there's methylcobalamin, there's adenosylcobalamin. There can be pros and cons around all of those, and your genetics can really help you understand which may be the best form, because at the end of the day, you've got to get your B12 activated. You've got to get it into the methylcobalamin and the adenosylcobalamin form. Some people can't do that very effectively. They can't do it regardless of whether it's B12 coming in from their diet or B12 coming in from a supplement. Once we've got people's genetics, we can really direct them to the best form for them to absorb. And if they can't activate it, we just simply give them the activated form. So you can get things right and really make a difference, or you can be taking things that at the end of the day won't make any difference at all. The other thing to really consider around your B12 is that, whether you're eating it from a dietary point of view or you're supplementing, it's going to end up in your stomach acid. And what we know is that your gastric acid destroys your B12. How do you protect that? How do we stop that from happening for everyone at any point in time? What your body does is it produces this particular protein, and that protein is going to bind to your B12, and once it's in that bound form, it's protected through that stomach acid and delivered into the intestines where it will be absorbed. Genetically, some people do not make very good levels of that binding protein. Again, it doesn't matter how it's coming into the body, it gets destroyed in the stomach acid. If we identify those people at a genetic level, what we do is we deliver their B12 in a different way. We either get them to take it sublingually, so it absorbs across the oral mucosa directly into the bloodstream, or they'll be better off doing a sublingual form. So the way that you deliver your supplement may also be really important, but you won't know that unless you first go in and look at your genetics. The first thing is we've got to get it protected through the stomach acid, and then it's going to end up in the small intestines. And it's across the small intestinal wall that your B12 is going to be absorbed. But guess what? the ability to absorb your B12 is genetically determined. Some people cannot absorb their B12 well across the small intestines. If that ends up being you, the same thing, we will direct you to a sublingual or an intramuscular supplement. But if you absorb it well, then you don't need to go to those other forms. You want to get it right here because getting it right will make a really big difference. The second really critical nutrient that you must be aware of if you're plant-based or vegan is vitamin D. Now, even if you're not plant-based or vegan, getting enough vitamin D in from a dietary point of view can be a little bit of a challenge. There's not a lot of foods that have vitamin D in them, and the best source will be your fatty fish. So that will be things like your salmon. And this is something to be aware of with people who are plant-based. People are plant-based in a number of different ways. Some people will be eating eggs and some people will still be taking fish. What you've got to know is what is and isn't coming into your diet and where you may be at risk. Now, in people who are plant-based or vegan, they are often aware that their vitamin D levels may not be met. Not always, but it's usually something that they have thought about. And they go, I'm going to eat mushrooms. Mushrooms are a really good source of vitamin D. However, unless your mushroom has been exposed to light during its growth, it's going to have almost no vitamin D in it. If you're plant-based or vegan, when it comes to vitamin D, you're most likely going to really need to consider some supplementation. Don't just run out and take a whole bunch of vitamin D. One of the things you really want to do is get a baseline measurement. So go and get your 25-hydroxy vitamin D measured through a blood test, and that's going to let you know what those blood levels are. And then if they're not good, you can really consider beginning to supplement. Now, if any of you had listened to a previous podcast, we went into a lot of detail around the vitamin D pathway. What you have to be aware of, if you haven't listened to that podcast, go and have a good listen to it. But don't think that just because you take a vitamin D supplement that everything is sorted. You've got to activate that vitamin D, you've got to transport it through the body, and finally, your vitamin D receptor has to be working. All of that is determined by your genetics. If you don't know what's happening in those pathways, you may be taking vitamin D as a supplement and getting no clinical outcome. Have a think about, if you're on vitamin D, how are you going to make it work more effectively for you? And your vitamin D pathway is one of the most important pathways in the body. Every tissue in your body has a vitamin D receptor. So if you are plant-based or vegan, don't play around with this pathway. You cannot afford to become deficient, and you cannot afford for it to not be working in your favour. Another really important nutrient to be considering here is choline. It's often not on the radar screen of anyone. Most patients I speak to around their choline requirements go, what's that? Never have heard of it before. But it's a critical nutrient in the body. Again, it's one of these nutrients that we're not good at manufacturing. So unless it's coming in from a dietary point of view, we're not going to be getting enough of it. Choline is really important around our mental health and around our cognitive health. If you become low in choline, you can have some real issues around balancing out your neurotransmitters, and so this is where the impact around mental health comes. If we look at early Alzheimer's researchers, they were really focused on something called acetylcholine. Now, this is where we've got to understand this kind of step-by-step process, is that when you eat foods that are high in choline, your body then takes that choline and converts it to phosphatidylcholine. And then phosphatidylcholine is converted to acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is critical around brain function, around memory and around cognition. So you can see why Alzheimer's researchers were really interested in trying to manipulate your acetylcholine. But if you're vegan or plant-based, especially if you're vegan, you have often stripped choline out of your diet. We're going to find it at really good levels in things like our fish, and eggs. So again, if you're plant-based and eating eggs, then there's this ability to introduce it in. But you've got to be making sure that it comes into your diet. There's a lot of genetics around choline requirements. We see for some pregnant women, their levels of choline may be 3 times higher than the recommended average. And if these women are not getting enough choline, it means that their developing fetus is also at risk. And we see that choline is really important for developing the brain and the neural network during pregnancy. So again, for women who are plant-based or vegan and considering a pregnancy or are pregnant, you've got to know what you're doing with these supplements. It's not just your health you may be putting at risk, it's the development of your baby as well. What we need to do is we need to make sure that there's plenty of choline-based foods coming into our diet, but you may be taking a lot of choline and you simply cannot produce phosphatidylcholine, and that's because there's a number of genes that produce enzymes that allow that conversion to happen. It is very easy for us to go in genetically and look to see what is your capacity to drive that conversion pathway. And if you can't drive that pathway, it won't matter how much choline you do or don't get into your diet, you're not going to be able to produce enough phosphatidylcholine. And these are the people that need to take phosphatidylcholine as a supplement long term. Now, you don't want to run out and just buy a phosphatidylcholine. If you don't need it, you don't need it. But if you do need it, it makes a difference. At a clinic level, I don't see a lot of people who can't make that conversion, but in the people that can't and end up supplementing with phosphatidylcholine, it can make an enormous difference to the way that they feel. It really impacts around mental health and well-being, and a lot of people, and we've talked about this in some previous podcasts, we talk about that methylation pathway, but your choline is very important for driving methylation as well. If you need it, you want to take it, but without your genetics, it's really difficult to know, is choline on its own going to be enough for me, or do I need to supplement? But if you're plant-based or vegan, choline should be on the list of things that you're considering finding out about. The fourth really critical nutrient to be considering here are your essential fatty acids, primarily your EPA and your DHA. There is a reason that they're called essential fatty acids, and that's because they are essential to our health and well-being. If you look at your red blood cells, you've got this cell membrane, and all of these essential fatty acids are incorporated into this cell membrane, and pretty much everything gets in and out of the cell through that cell membrane. So this is why you don't want to become low in these essential fatty acids. Now, for vegans especially, they will be very vulnerable around not having enough EPA and particularly not enough DHA. If you eat fish or you take a fish oil supplement, you will be directly introducing EPA and DHA into the body. So if you're eating fish, taking a fish oil supplement, you will be able to support your requirements. But if you're vegan and you're going, I'm not eating fish and I refuse to take a fish oil supplement, one, I want you to think, have you even thought about how you're maintaining your DHA levels? Some vegans will go, no, I'm taking an algae-based oil, so I'm introducing DHA in that manner. So there are alternatives outside of taking a fish oil. But a lot of vegans, it's not even something that they're thinking about. Or they go, I'm eating my chia seeds and my flax seeds, and what my body is going to do is convert that into my EPA and DHA. That may not be happening. So if we look at that pathway, again, under genetic control. So things like chia seeds and flax seeds will be giving you something called ALA, which is alpha-linoleic acid. You could take your ALA and convert it into EPA and into DHA. But what we're seeing from the research is that pathway is inherently weak in humans, that unless we're eating fish or taking a fish oil supplement, it's unlikely that we're going to be producing enough EPA and DHA. Even without looking at the genetics of that pathway, the amount of ALA that ends up as DHA is 0.1%, so very poor conversion. And then if you overlay the genetics on that pathway, in some people that pathway is working at 50% reduction, in other people 100%. And so you can see if you're not eating fish or taking a fish oil supplement or taking an algae-based supplement, it's very, very difficult to make sure that you're getting enough. And when we look at things from a health perspective, it's the DHA component that's particularly important. When we're looking at mental health and cognitive health, it is the DHA that is crossing over our blood-brain barrier and really impacting on brain and cognitive function. If we look at our requirements for DHA, we see that the highest need is when we're in utero. And again, I keep coming back to women who are in preconception care or pregnant. If you're plant-based or vegan, you want to be really focusing in on that, because the research is showing if there's a deficiency in utero, we may never account for that later on. So highest need in utero, and then the next highest need is in the first couple of years of life. You might look and go, okay, well, I didn't know that, and I think I'm going to go out and take a fish oil now. And the problem is your ability to respond to that fish oil is genetic. So you begin to see how important it is to know your genetics. We see from people that their response to fish oil varies, and this is why the research around fish oil is all over the place. Some researchers go, it's great, it does a good job for you. Other researchers go, no, doesn't make any difference at all. But our genetics determines our response. We see that for some people, even if they're taking a fish oil, they are an incredibly poor responder. They can take fish oil for 6 months and their EPA and DHA levels hardly move. So if you're a research subject and someone's looking and measuring your fish oil levels after you've been supplementing and it doesn't help, they just go, well, it doesn't help, but it's because you've not responded. Other people can respond really well. If you're a poor responder to a fish oil supplement, you have to hit threshold dosing limits. If you dose below those limits, it's not going to make any difference. And even when you hit those limits, it can take a really long time. And again, when I'm dealing with women in preconception and pregnancy, it's like you want to look early here because it might take you 6 to 12 months to address this. So you want to start early so that you've got these really good levels of DHA. And we also know, based on people's genetics, you can direct them to the best type of fish oil for them. When you're taking a fish oil supplement, the majority of fish oils in the marketplace are what we call the triglyceride form. Now, if you're a poor responder, that form isn't going to be the best for you. You are going to do much, much better on what we call a phospholipid form, and that's the krill oil. Now, krill oil, there's no harm in taking krill oil if you don't need it, but it is also so much more expensive than a normal fish oil. So if you need a krill oil and you're taking the triglyceride form, it's not really going to do the job. But if you don't need the krill oil, maybe you don't want to spend all of that money on something, you can use something that's going to work a little bit better and is a little bit cheaper for you as well. The type of fish oil you take, your response to fish oil is genetically determined. So again, go in and get your genetics done and you can make much, much better choices that are going to equate into better outcomes for you. For all of you out there who are plant-based or vegan or maybe even considering going down that pathway, the most important thing is to make sure that you are meeting your nutritional requirements. The really important nutrients for you to be focused in on are your vitamin B12, your vitamin D, your choline and its capacity to convert into phosphatidylcholine and your essential fatty acids. Your genetics is playing a role in all of those pathways. Using your genetic data to assess those pathways will allow you to modify your diets in the best possible way, and that if you do supplement, to supplement in a way that's going to be effective. Thank you so much for listening to Genetics Decoded. If you enjoyed the episode, please remember to subscribe, like, and share. Tell your friends all about what we're doing, because we truly are individuals. Your genetic data can be used for you to make much better decisions around your diet, supplements, and lifestyle. Join me each week to find out how.